Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today we're jumping into some ProRevenge with a story that has been deleted from Reddit. This one comes to us from TA Sociopath. Girlfriend cheated on me, so I got her and her new boyfriend arrested. Let's jump right in. This story took place many years ago and now I figure it might be worth it to share. Using a throwaway account for reasons that will shortly become apparent, and I'm additionally going to be intentionally vague at times and changing details. First, a little bit about me. At a relatively young age, I was diagnosed with conduct disorder, which in my case was a nice way of saying I exhibited sociopathic traits. Antisocial personality disorder was the final diagnosis. I was in my teens at the time, after being treated for anxiety disorders and ADHD. And it unfortunately didn't happen until after a run-in with the law. As a result, I would spend the next 20 years in therapy, first as part of a court order, and then just as a habit. I must admit, it's somewhat enjoyable to be able to be completely open and not have to censor myself or lie and pretend to someone. The odd thing is, I was in therapy during the time when the dominant paradigm, at least in my experience, was that sociopaths were made and psychopaths were born. But my parents weren't abusive, I didn't suffer at the hands of my siblings, and nothing I can think of from my peers stood out as particularly extreme experiences of bullying that the average person wouldn't be subjected to. So I'm not sure why I am the way I am. I'm not a particularly violent person, and I do have a conscience and empathy, though both are heavily stunted, and I can switch them off at will if need be. Things that make me tear up in private won't even cause a muscle twitch if I'm in public. And the list of things that can do so in private have rapidly decreased as I age, unless I'm extremely drunk. And I do have what you'd call a fear response, but as far as I can tell, it manifests differently than it does for normal people. It's a purely physiological thing where I feel the full effects of the adrenaline released into my system and become more concentrated and aware of my surroundings. It's actually quite the high, and I enjoy it. There's more to it than this, obviously. For example, I don't understand people who grieve the dead. I never cried at a funeral or when one of my pets died, but that should paint enough of a picture of who I am. These traits of mine have given me, to my understanding, certain advantages in life, but most are beyond the scope of this story. As a final personal note, I should mention that I lost my first girlfriend at age 19 because 3 months into our relationship, I cheated on her. Some girl I had met just out on the street, never even got her name. We talked a little bit, I was on my game that day, and invited her back to my place to have a drink. After we did adult stuff, I was laying there and suddenly imagined my girlfriend walking in at that very moment, just thinking about the look on her face. Then, I thought about how I would feel if I walked in on her with another guy. At the moment, I realized I had effed up, and I quickly got the other girl to get dressed and leave. What was worse, she was super nice about it and told me I should see about getting therapy for addiction, not in a spiteful way, which also made me feel sort of bad. I came clean to my girlfriend and she dumped me, of course. But I always remembered the thoughts I had after cheating and realized that I didn't want to do that to another person. To this day, I stand by this. This will be important later. So enter college. Unfortunately, due to the legal strictures imposed on me in my youth, I didn't get to attend until after I turned 21, as I was on papers up until that point. There are more circumstances that helped with the delay, but that was the primary one. So here I am, 3 years older than the other freshmen living off campus. As a creature of habit, my previous years had turned me into quite the homebody. I made a few friends, but I didn't really have any romantic connections for years. I hooked up here and there, as one does, but on the whole, I was fairly alone. Enter my first real serious relationship, a girl I met on Tinder. We'll call her Anna. Anna and I met up right after my roommate had moved out of my apartment. I had a 2-bedroom place for $500 a month, which was cheap even for the time, especially considering they allowed pets. Anna was looking for a place to stay, and I happened to have a room available for an incredible price. So I showed it to her. On our first date, I told her I'd give her a tour of the room she'd be staying in, and we spent the day in my room. Ultimately, turned out I was telling the truth. Now, Anna told me a few things about herself after we started dating. Turns out, her father owned a fairly successful business and gave her some money each month for living expenses. What a deal that was! I was working a tech support job at the time that had been exciting at first, but was beginning to wear on me. Oddly enough, this happens with every job I get, so I put in for an indefinite leave that involved a few white lies, and she and I essentially became unemployed, with a monthly stipend to get us by. This was the state of things for over a year, and those were the good times. We ended up getting a dog together, and I love that furry little bastard more than any person alive. He's still with me to this day, though he's much older now and on his last leg, but I'm hopeful he'll last the year at least. Anna gets her own car, so now we have two. But things started to fall apart when the police came by one day and asked to speak with her. She left with them early in the morning. They knocked at the door, she answered it, came in, and told me the police wanted to talk to her about something and left. After a few hours, I still hadn't heard from her. I tried calling her phone and it went unanswered. Finally, in the early afternoon, I got a phone call from the county jail. Played the collect call message and everything, and provided her name as the one calling. Turns out, she hadn't been given a monthly stipend from her dad every month. She just knew his account information and was accessing it without his knowledge or consent. And he filed a police report when he found out. She was being charged with misdemeanor fraud. She wanted me to bail her out. Okay, fine, I'd done a stint in jail before, and I knew it wasn't fun. So I went through the process of finding a bail bondsman using what cash reserves we had to deal with him, and getting her out. The whole thing was long and painful, and now she had to show up to court on a set date, and she had lost her job in the interim, even though she was only in there for about 4 days. So without an income source, I went back to my prior job, and was fortunate that they were glad to hire me back. The timing almost couldn't have been better. They were just about ready to look for some new hires and had a project I could work on until they were actually ready. So I began work pretty much the next week. Money problem solved. Of course, I also took the graveyard shift because it paid slightly better. I had to sleep during the day now, and our time together was cut into as a result, but it made things workable. Unfortunately, Anna now had too much time on her hands. She would often walk our dog around the neighborhood just to get out of the house. That's how she met Steve. Steve was a guy who lived a couple of neighborhoods away and had a dog of his own. He would go running with his dog a few miles every few days, and on one of these days, he happened to cross paths with Anna. To this day, I don't know exactly how it happened, and I don't exactly care either, but they became, shall we say, fast friends. Steve smoked weed. Anna also smoked weed. I didn't, not out of any sort of principle, but because I didn't like how it made me feel. Unless I was commensurately drunk. It always gave me what one might call a bad trip. I'm talking hallucinations and full-on disassociation. I'm not sure if it has anything to do with my sociopathic tendencies, but I do know that I don't like this stuff. But I'm fine with others partaking. Suddenly, within a few weeks, Anna and Steve are spending a lot more time together. Steve doesn't have a car, so Anna drives him to his job because that's what friends do. This is when I start noticing red flags, though I didn't realize how common they were among cheaters at the time. Anna starts fighting with me over small comments, even things that are hard to interpret as anything other than a joke. Think movie quotes and you'll get an idea. Little things I do begin to annoy her that previously she loved. Her phone becomes glued to her hand, and she seems to think typing away under a blanket means she is being subtle. Her lock screen password has been changed. Here's the thing, remember my tech support job? Yeah, I'm actually very good with computers. Anna is not. So I helped her set up her phone. I set up and maintained all the equipment for internet and Wi-Fi. The whole apartment's network was built by me. So what do? I go into investigative mode. First, I subtly get her new phone passcode. It takes me a few tries since she's somewhat aware of me, but I do eventually see over her shoulder once when she unlocks her phone. Next, I use Wireshark to start watching network traffic on my wireless network. This seems like a good middle ground until I can actually get access to her phone. And third, I install a keylogger on our shared computer and get the passwords to her email address and social media accounts. Facebook and its messaging service were in widespread use by this time. Now, here's where things get interesting. I check her email. Turns out I didn't even need to log in. She failed to log out after her last use, and find a sent email to a different friend of hers mentioning how they ran into Anna and Steve at Walmart a week back and talking about how Steve was hot. Odd. So I end up asking her about it, saying that I was auditing our wireless network for intrusion attempts and saw she sent that email because she didn't encrypt it. She got defensive at first, saying I should have told her if I was going to be spying on the internet. I said I didn't think I had any need to at the time, and again asked her about the email. She said I should have come to her without jumping to conclusions or accusing her of something. I calmly pointed out that I was doing exactly that. After I said that, she forced herself to calm down and said she really meant me, not Steve, and just hadn't read the email closely. Seems plausible on the surface since Steve's name had only come up once and it was her friend who said it. So I openly accepted this information and asked that she just correct the misunderstanding with her friend, which she did right in front of me to prove she was doing it. I didn't bother pointing out how empty a gesture this was, how her immediate defensiveness wasn't the only red flag she'd been displaying, or that she and I hadn't run into any of her friends while out and about lately. Cue a few weeks later. I'm still trying to find a good time to get access to her phone, and she tells me she's going to visit her family in the city about 2 hours away over the weekend. I can't go because I have to work. She's fine with this, of course. I see her off, then go back to the computer and check her accounts again. Nothing immediately jumps out as far as messaging or emails, but I do find in her search history a bed and breakfast in the area she said she was going to. How odd that someone who was visiting family would be looking up hotels. She's silent the entire weekend. No phone calls, no texts, no nothing. When she comes back, she's in tears, saying she's sorry she went off the grid, but her family had her committed over the weekend, saying they were afraid she was suicidal. But she thinks they just wanted to punish her more for stealing money from them. So I hug her, tell her it's okay, it's not her fault, I still love her, etc. If she's going to lie to my face, I'll respond in kind. But this seems to put her at ease, and soon after I get my chance at her phone. She falls asleep while watching something, and her phone was left on the charger. Perfect. So I disconnect the phone, walk into the other room, unlock it, and go through her messages. What I found wasn't surprising in the least. She had long text conversations with Steve, saying she loves him, calling him the same pet name she calls me, all that stuff. I scrolled up to the weekend she was committed and carefully go back through the history. Sure enough, there it is. They planned on spending the weekend together at the bed and breakfast she looked up, leaving me alone to take care of the dog and wonder if she was even alive while she was having relations with another man. This was when I had an epiphany that I have never come back from. Wouldn't be much of an epiphany if I had. That feeling of not wanting to hurt someone by cheating on them that I, a diagnosed sociopath, had when I lost my first girlfriend due to cheating on her. The realization that I had effed up and the decision to come clean immediately. Anna didn't have that. I want you to think about that for a moment and the implications it would have for me personally. So what did I do? Go in there, tell her I knew everything, break up with her in an epic relationship ending fight? No, I didn't do a thing. I went back into the bedroom, plugged her phone back in, climbed in next to her, and kept watching the show. Well, that's not true. I plotted. She woke up and I smiled, kissed her, act like nothing was wrong. I had flipped the switch. She wasn't my girlfriend anymore. She just didn't know that I knew. For the next 3 days, I acted completely fine whenever she was around. But I had a plan. After thinking about it while she slept, I knew she would go to Steve's house to smoke weed. At the time, in my state, possession of weed was a big no-no. You faced 6 months in jail for having it, and police had testing kits that they would use in the field or whatever you call it. Now, unfortunately, I didn't know where Steve lived, but I had a rough idea. Anna would take her car to go visit him. I would wait for her to leave, then take my own car and canvass the area until I found where she was, and by extension, where the two of them were smoking weed. Anna mentioned Steve was in a house, not an apartment, so this seemed like a viable way to track her down. Then, I'd go knock on the neighbors' doors until I could get someone to let me use their phone, call the police, and leave a tip that I had seen someone driving erratically through the neighborhood as if under the influence. Then followed them to his address, where I saw them get out with a weird-looking pipe. Now enter the story, Caitlin. Caitlin was my neighbor and a friend, and she helped me get my apartment. Caitlin and I had been flirtatious early on, but she had gotten a boyfriend, and I then started dating Anna. Well, Caitlin was single now, so I had gone over to her place and shared my woes over drinks and mentioned my plan, having gotten strong evidence of Anna's cheating. Caitlin was somewhat surprised, to say the least. She also smoked and said that while she didn't approve of weed laws, she couldn't really blame me for using them this way to get back at Anna. But she urged me to just dump Anna and get it over with, because my current living conditions were unhealthy. I didn't explain to her why it was easy for me, but it did cause me to consider something I had missed in my plan. If Anna and Steve both get arrested, who is she going to call? Probably the guy who bailed her out last time. We can't have that now, can we? Besides, this might be a rare circumstance where I can have my cake and eat it too, and benefit in the end. While I briefly considered letting her call me and telling her I knew everything then, I would also be paying for the call, which wasn't worth it. I stayed talking with Caitlin until Anna came home. Since we were neighbors, I saw her car drive by to my apartment. I decided to take her advice and went to confront Anna straight away. I have to say, I have never had so much fun dismantling a person. I wish I had known about common cheater refrains before so I could be better prepared, but I enjoyed it. I told her I knew she was cheating and she wasn't going to live with me anymore, starting immediately. She denied it at first, but I had evidence. Then she yelled at me that I was crazy, and I screamed back that if I were crazy, she would be glad to get out of the apartment and away from me. She said she loved me and begged me not to throw us away. I said she did that already, there was nothing for me to throw away. But in spite of everything, she never admitted to cheating. Fine, I didn't really need her to anyway. So eventually she storms out and I head back to Caitlin's for a bit. We talk and I ask her what her plans are for the night. She doesn't have any. I mention my night is open, but I have to take care of one last thing first. She tries for a moment to talk me out of it, but I say I have my reasons, and promise to grab some hard liquor on the way back. Then, I'm all hers for the rest of the night. I leave my phone in my apartment and head to the neighborhood I know Steve lives in. I drive up and down streets, and before long, spot Anna's car. I make note of the house it's parked at. It's in the driveway, which is good. I'd be less sure if it were on the street. I park a little ways down the road, then walk back and start knocking on doors. The first neighbor isn't comfortable letting me borrow their phone. The second one is, but insists on standing there. I pretty much followed my planned dialogue, but added that I followed the car from a couple streets away because they sideswiped me while they were drifting, and made sure I mentioned when the two passengers got out, they were both walking funny. They asked for the address and said an officer would be there shortly, and requested I wait nearby to give a statement. I said, sure. I did wait nearby, but didn't want to talk to the police or get directly involved in any way, so I just stayed in my car as far as I could while still seeing the house. Minutes later, 2 police cruisers pulled up to Steve's house and walked to it. I waited with bated breath. Nothing else happened for close to half an hour. Then, both Steve and Anna were brought out in handcuffs. I still remember the rush of euphoria I got from that scene. I couldn't see her face, but I like to think she was crying. After the police left with Steve and Anna in tow, I went to the store, got the nicest whiskey bottle I could find, and went back to Caitlin. She asked me how it went. I told her it went as well as I could have hoped. We spent the night drinking, watching Netflix, playing games, and ultimately slept together. Turned a horrible night into one of my better ones. I didn't really do much follow-up with Steve and Anna. I just kept an eye on their cases as much as was publicly available. I saw they were booked and what the charges were. I don't know what their ultimate sentencing was, but Steve was facing up to 6 months easily, and Anna could be facing over a year with the drug and fraud charges combined. And I still had my dog. Caitlin and I didn't really work out long term, and we never got serious. She ended up moving out of state a few months later, and I lost contact with her. After my own lease was up, I also moved. I never had to see Anna again. Unfortunately, this was the beginning of a trend of always being cheated on, which has made it hard for me to give a crap about people, something that's already more difficult for me. This was the first, though, and the one where I feel I really wound up better off immediately afterwards. But every time after this, it didn't hurt when I got cheated on, it got me excited. Because most of the time, I have to play in your world. When you cheat on me, that's when we're playing in mine. And I'm going to be so much better at it than you are. Okay, so the comment section on this one is absolutely crazy. Everybody's saying to OP that they made up this story and that it doesn't have even the slightest foot in reality. Some even going as far as saying that the story was made up by AI because it's written so well. Now, the fact that I've read over 1,000 ProRevenge stories on this channel leads me to believe that yes, this story may be embellished a bit. Okay, actually it might be embellished a lot, because it seems to take some of the plot lines out of other stories that we've done in the past. But then part of me sits back and thinks, well, there's really not that many ways you can get cheated on. The stories are going to kind of sound the same, and the way that we deal with them, well, there aren't a whole lot of options there either. I'd like to think that a lot of the stories we read and hear on ProRevenge might help us in the future if we're ever in a situation like this ourselves, and I'm hoping that's the way it was for OP. We really can sum up this whole 20-minute read though with one sentence: I cheated, but it's okay. She cheated, and I destroyed her. As usual, I will link to the story in the description down below, however the story has been removed. Now you can still go there and read through the comments, and I recommend you do that because it's crazy. Thank you for watching and listening. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.